Today we're going to learn about embroidery basics. Ever wanted to personalize your clothing or make home decor with embroidery? Well, sit tight and we'll go over the very basic stitches and materials you need to get started. Free embroidery is a technique we'll be exploring, and this is the most common type of embroidery that you see in department stores. Free embroidery allows you to stitch designs on all kinds of material. However, some fabric is easier to work with than others. The most important thing to remember when selecting a fabric is its stretch and how stiff it is. Really delicate material will need interfacing. Interfacing is a material that stabilizes your embroidery by being sewn in or heated and fused to the material during the embroidery process. You won't want to use thick material, as it makes embroidery more difficult and can even break your needle. If you think back to all the places you've seen embroidery, you'll notice that it appears on all kinds of fabrics and material. From denim to dress shirts, we've used colored thread to add flair to our fabric for a long time. Next, we'll look at our thread. We're using cotton thread today, but just like with fabric, there are many choices to consider, such as thread count. Embroidery floss is twisted colored thread used for embroidery. It is usually 6 strands twisted together. You typically separate 2 to 3 strands to thread your needle with, according to your project instructions or for the look you want on your pattern. Less thread shows off more detail and white space that defines your design. More thread makes your design look filled in and lush. For today's project, I recommend using 3 strands and one spot where we'll use 6. I'll let you know when. As you become more advanced, you can experiment with silk thread, wool thread, floche, and other materials. Don't forget to play around with the colors. Before we get started stitching, let's talk about needles. Different needles are needed for different material weights, but for most projects, every needle you will need is included in the Take and Make kit or easily available at craft stores and grocery stores. Today, we'll use our needle threader to thread our embroidery needle. We'll need a sharp pair of fabric scissors to cut out our material for the embroidery hoop. Cut material to be just a bit bigger than the embroidery hoop size so that the edges of the material will cover more than the edge of the hoop. This way, the hoop is more secure for handling. Insert the needle threader through the eye of the needle. Slip your thread through the loop of the threader and pull it through the eye of the needle by tugging the threader. Now knot your thread and begin stitching. If you recall from the hand sewing basics video, the back stitch is made by pulling your knotted thread from the back of the hoop to the front, inserting the needle straight across to make a stitch, and pulling the needle through to the back again. Then, space your needle a stitch length away from the back of the hoop and pull through to the front, connecting where your first stitch ended. Tension matters a lot, as it can make holes appear in your fabric or bunch the material like so. Next, let's learn how to make a split stitch. A split stitch can be used to outline parts of a pattern and is generally good to work around curves. To make it, pull your knotted thread through from the back of the hoop to make a small stitch. Then, starting from the back of the hoop, measure about halfway down the stitch and begin your next stitch there. Finish your stitch and repeat. Next, I'll show how to make a French knot. These are fun and easy knots to make. First, knot your thread and pull it through from the back of the hoop. Then wrap your thread 2 or 3 times around the needle. Then insert the needle very close to the point of origin and carefully pull the thread through to the back. For this material, I recommend wrapping the thread 3 times around for a full knot that will not pass through the holes of the material. Once you've run out of thread or you're ready to start on another part of your project, couch the needle and thread by tucking it under the previous stitch you made and knot the thread like so. Snip the thread close to the knots to keep the back of your hoop tidy. Now let's learn how to fill in a shape on your pattern with a satin stitch. With a satin stitch, you're going to stitch threads parallel to each other as you work to fill in the shape of your embroidery pattern. Now you're ready to learn about patterns. There are several places to find patterns. The library has different books in the collection with patterns you can copy and print out. You can also trace your own pattern by making a light box, or you can run a Google search for line drawings. If you're feeling brave, try to freehand your own illustration on a piece of fabric with a pencil or a water-soluble pen. Today we'll be tracing a pattern included in your kit. To trace this pattern, we need to make a light box. Find a flat, clear lid and a flashlight, or use the flashlight app on a smartphone. Tape your design to the top of the lid and lay it on a table. Slide the flashlight underneath the design so that the design is directly over the light. Your design should be nice and bright. Lay your material over the design and use a pencil or a water-soluble pen to trace the design onto the material. The light should shine through the design and make it easy to trace. Be sure to take your time. Now we're ready to put it all together. Taking your embroidery hoop, loosen the screw on the top and place your material between the inner hoop and the one with the screw. Arrange your material for the top of your design to be underneath the screw, because if you wish to hang your finished project, that's where you'll be hanging from. Tighten the screw so that the material stays firmly in place but isn't too stretched out. You want it taut enough to stay flat, but not so tight that the material stretches the holes when you push a needle through it. With your design on your material and your colors picked out, you're ready to start stitching. Separate the floss you need for your design and decide what kinds of stitches you'd like to use on your outline. Since slip stitches are good for curves, I'm going to outline all the curves with that. Tie a simple knot and begin. Remember to not pull too tightly or you'll warp the fabric and the overall design if your thread is too tense. I want to fill in this outer ring with purple, so I'll use the Satin Stitch to do so. Now I want to outline the cross part of this design. So since it's straight, I will use a back stitch, and I'll still be using 3 strands.
Rather than use just a regular satin stitch here, I want to show you a variation of it used to fill in a space on designs. We'll still be stitching parallel stitches, but now we'll intersperse between long and short stitches. Here I have 2 short stitches, then 1 long stitch, alternating in this way until the desired space is filled in. Remember when I said we would use all 6 strands of the floss? Here we are. Use 6 strands of the embroidery floss to fill in this cross section. I'm going to use the satin stitch again to fill in every other little block on this inner circle here, but feel free to get creative and try something new. And to finish this project off, I'm going to put a French knot in the center of each empty block I left on my project. Now I have a few helpful tips as you progress through your embroidery projects. Adjust the stitch size before you commit to pulling the fiber through the material. Take your time and look to see how this stitch fits in with the whole pattern. If a tangle does happen, don't panic. Since the floss was formerly 6 strands spun together, many times the tangle is actually just spun thread, and you can straighten this out. You can help prevent tangles by making sure the thread you're working with is the length between your nose and your fingertips of your outstretched hand. This prevents the thread from being too long to handle. If it turns out your tangle is knotted, go ahead and use a seam ripper or a small pair of scissors to cut your thread and knot from the backside of the embroidery hoop or mesh. Lastly, don't underestimate how forgiving fiber is. There's a reason embroidery has been around for such a long time, and since its inception, the art has not changed much.
That's all I have for you today. Join us at our follow-up Zoom meeting, December 16th at 6 p.m. for our Fiber Art Gallery. Bring your projects from hand sewing basics or an embroidery project. The Fiber Art Gallery will feature you, the fiber artists, and your projects. Come prepared to talk about materials, problems you've encountered, solutions you found, and ask any questions you might have about future or current fiber art projects. See you then!